Welcome to the Motogp Xtra podcast.
So the second of the triple headers is now behind us, the Thai GP, an interesting weekend for the MotoGP circus. I'm Rhys, and joining me as always to discuss the events of the weekend is my co-host Dill. So Dill, we'll get straight into it this weekend, not much pre-weekend stuff to talk about, unlike we do on some episodes, so we'll get straight into Moto3. Moto3 shortened race, obviously straight away, because it started raining in the morning in Thailand. They hadn't had a wet session all weekend, so they let them go around, do some extra sighting laps. Then, obviously, they actually ended up shortening the race. But wet, I've got wet in sort of inverted commas here on the notes, because the track looked pretty much bone dry to me. I don't know what you thought. There was a couple of wet patches, but looked very, very dry.
Yeah, again, arguments of why we don't have warm-ups for the Moto2 and Moto3 class goes straight on to top of the agenda, where at least if they had a couple of laps in the morning, the race wouldn't be shortened and all that. So it just shows a knock-on effect, I reckon, if they have their normal old-school race weekend where we had maybe 10-15 minutes of warm-up for them, they get a full-length race and stuff. So, yeah, and in terms of conditions, I think just the fact that there had been a bit of rain and it was a bit kind of here and there, and like, for example, the curbs and the white lines, that kind of thing. I don't think the actual racing line at all was. I think Eddie O'Shea was the only one to go on wets, and he pitted at some point in the race because he was just like, it was a lost cause. But no, I wouldn't have classed it as a wet race at all. I think they had to kind of do it just so, because it technically was raining, but I still would say it was a dry track with a few sketchy areas. But yeah, it wasn't definitely wet by any means. And to be honest, I actually wish it was, 'cause I do like a good wet race. Moto3 in the wet adds a very different dynamic because you get much spread out fields and you got really good racing, and you usually get a few spills and trills as well. So maybe missed an opportunity today, unfortunately. But the normal race, with it being shortened, was still a good little battle, in fairness.
Yeah, it's been a good while since we had a proper wet Moto3 race, and they do tend to be quite good. Just always good to change it up a little bit, because I think most Moto3 races play out pretty much the same, but when you get the wet ones, it really does bring the riders into it a little bit more than these sort of random group battles that you get. But like you said, again, another reason to say sort of wet race. Eddie O'Shea was the only rider that went on the wet tyres. Bit of a gamble, I think. You know, he's not got anything to lose. He's only just come into the championship, so it was worth making it. But as you say, he was basically coming up to being lapped as he pitted. You saw him actually entering the pit lane when the camera was showing the leaders. So yeah, didn't quite work out for him, but I suppose worth the gamble when you're only just coming to the championship, because if it had rained, he'd look like an absolute hero. But I suppose the most interesting thing about the race, other than that, was David Alonso. Once again, we've probably ran out of things to say about this kid this season. He's done so many impressive things, and once again he manages to do it. He wins the race in really good fashion. Another proper good scrap, proper good defensive riding on the last lap, and he actually now breaks the record for most wins in the lightweight class in a season. So Dill, Rossi's record's gone. I'm sure you're absolutely devastated with that.
I know, because I'll always hang on that there's more races and less races in different areas. So, in all seriousness, it was going to go. It's a question of how far can he put it out of reach for others. I kind of feel bad for listeners, because every week we just bang on about how good he is, and like for some reason, like I know for a fact, on my own YouTube channel, I've seen a few people not taking too much of it, liking to him. So like, I feel sorry. I try not to go on too much about him, but like, he's breaking records. He's winning championships with about half a season left to go. Like, you can't not talk about how dominant Alonso's been. And again today, he's done exactly what we said. You could literally take the snippet from the last podcast, change the track, and pretty much replay it, because he's done the same thing. He just sits in fifth and then just decides when he wants to go. And as I'm getting older, my memory's not as good as it was, but I can't think of anyone who had that much control in Grand Prix racing. So it's a scary prospect, but as we've seen, being fast in the Moto3 class doesn't always turn out to be someone that can go on to be bigger and better on bikes. So as much as he's had a brilliant season, I'm now turning all my focus on him to see how he does in Moto2 next year, because Eisen Guevara is a perfect example of someone that was brilliant in Moto3, and we all probably expect to see him one or two seasons in Moto2 and then get on the shopping list for MotoGP. But fortunately, that hasn't happened. It has looked like he's slowly but surely getting there, but it's taken him a long time. So the most interesting thing I can really talk about now with Alonso is next year on a Moto2 bike for him. But in terms of today, he was perfect. And yeah, again, I don't have much else to say. You can't beat perfection. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to sum it up, isn't it? We are just running out of things to say about David Alonso because he has just been so impressive this season. Like you say, yeah, there's some people that don't quite rate him, and I guess next year will kind of be the litmus test for that one. I personally think he'll get on fine. I think if you've shown that level of dominance and that level of bike control and all that stuff, obviously Guevara won in quite a good fashion in his, and he did have an element of that, but he tended to sort of win in the same way every time, whereas Alonso has won in plenty of different ways. And I think, like we saw with the Costa, basically, when you can see the natural talent on the bike, you know that they're going to be really good. And Guevara does seem to be finding his feet a little bit now. He equalled his best result today, so yeah, it's he maybe is finally getting there. I'll be interested to see how he gets on next year as well. So a couple of different people to watch out for in Moto 2. But back to Moto 3 for next year as well. These guys are going to be interesting to watch. The Leopard guys, Adrian Fernandez, Angel Piqueras, I think it's safe to say all season, probably aside from David Munoz, probably like two of the most aggressive riders on the grid. They've been pulling some really good overtakes. I mean, they're not all been dirty or anything like that. Some of them have just been aggressive but clean. But today, they both looked a bit desperate. They were both pulling some really, really hard moves. Then they started fighting with each other pretty hard. And literally, as the commentators on TNT said, they pretty much called it, or they were just thinking it, that these guys could take each other out in a minute. Down they go. Piqueras goes for a move up the inside of Fernandez. Down they go. And I think it was just a matter of time. I mean, it's one of those things, again, it was something my mum was even saying. So, again, it's one of those things that was obviously going to happen at some point because of how aggressive they were. We're like, oh, they could take each other out in a minute. And I think I said, yeah, I bet they will at some point, but not this race because it was only 2 laps to go. So I was thinking, there's no way they've got enough time to do it now. But they did, apparently. They did it with literally a lap and a corner to go, didn't they? Or 3 corners or so. And yeah, no penalties, no further action. I think that would probably be because the team probably pressed for no penalties, I would guess, or because it's teammate on teammate, they don't really, they've already lost out. So I guess that's probably why. Because otherwise, I don't see why you wouldn't give a penalty for a botched pass that's resulted in a crash. But I suppose Piqueras just crashed and his bike then took out Fernandez, which they are always a little bit more lenient on, I find. But did you see this the same way, Dill? Was this always a matter of time? Because from my perspective, it seemed like the way they were riding all race and the way they have been all season, really, it's bound to happen at some point.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, I suppose, because the team pay the price here because they've had two riders that have gone out. And to be fair, right, they are aggressive riders. Moto 3, everyone's aggressive. I've not seen major issues all year from them. But today's race, especially against each other, you just don't take out your teammate, and that's like one of several golden rules in motorsport. You don't take out your teammate, and I think a small bit plays a part that they're on a Honda. They have to almost be up for the fight on the warm-up lap. They have to be ready. They have to seize any opportunity they get, and I think that kind of shows in the way they ride. Keres has been ultra aggressive all year. Probably a bit of how he rides, kind of mixed in with fact he's on a slightly less performing Honda. I think if you mix all these together, Adrian Fernandez is no choir boy as well. So it was probably, I'd say in that garage there's probably 2 big personalities, and I think already this year's a write-off. The 2 of them are probably thinking next year we could be in the hunt again, similar to like Artola, for example, where they'll be there most of the season, and can they just maybe find that extra couple of percent to make it a championship challenge? So maybe they're both just trying to put a marker down inside the team, and it wouldn't be the first time teammates have flared up and caused issues. But silly move, unfortunate outcome. Again, it's a team. It's a team I feel sorry for, all the mechanics who've worked all weekend in these real extreme heats over in Thailand. So it's messy situation. You never like to see it. And it could have been prevented, but yeah, I'm sure they'll get a stern talking to, and from here on out we probably will see slightly different. I suppose we'll have cyan rules, and like the Papaya for McLaren, we'll have cyan rules. So don't kill each other on track, probably is the bottom line. But yeah. In fairness, look, it was a mistake, but yeah, it's never good. And as you say, I'm sure the team didn't want to penalise either way, because yeah, Honda's having a hard enough time at the moment. They don't need to be giving themselves more issues by taking each other out. So, yeah, look, clear the slate for them. Let them kind of have the rest of the season. I'll just let them finish up and see where they are next year. So I reckon these 2 will probably be close again, because I think Piqueras is coming in with a a bit of, maybe not a reputation, but he's coming in with an understanding he's probably going to be a front runner in the years to come. And I think Adrian Fernandez, a lot of people have probably overlooked him. He's turning into a nice little tidy Moto3 rider. So I think maybe a bit of a chip in the shoulder versus a guy who's coming in with ultra confidence, and a bit of a clash there. But yeah, be interested to see how they go again next year against each other in the same team.
Well, they're only teammates 2 more races, so it's not going to be much of a problem. Karas, I believe,
Yeah,
his way
exactly.
Out, so yeah, it should be pretty harmonious. I would guess they've only got to get through 2 more weekends. But you say obviously the Honda playing the part, but the Honda actually was working really well this weekend. I think we had Lunetta was on the podium. So we had the 2 Leopard guys. No, Lunetta didn't end up on the podium, did he? In the end, no, he did. Yeah, because it was the last corner. Like weird incident, wasn't there, with like
the barcode,
which we'll come on to later. But he did manage to get the podium at the last corner. We obviously had Scott Ogden was running in the lead group for a while as well, so Honda did seem to be a little bit more competitive at this circuit because those guys.
He was actually second. Because
yeah,
Wire ends up third.
Yeah, because he overtook for a sight on the entry to the corner, and then the incident happened on the exit. So that's his second podium. So Lunetta actually has been quite good the second half of the season. I'm quite excited to see what he does next year because I don't know where he's going. I don't know if he's staying there or what, but he seems to have turned into quite a good little rider as well. But like you were saying with Adrian Fernandez, so yeah, maybe we'll see those.
Definitely deserves another season, obviously, because he's probably one of the more at the front of the field. He's probably one of the riders with lesser experience. So
yeah, he's a rookie.
Hopefully, gets himself. Yeah. There you go, exactly. Like, but the thing is with Moto3, it's nearly kind of stupid saying, "Oh, he's a rookie," because they're like, "Oh yeah, so's Piquet, so's this guy." It's like, "Oh yeah, they're winning races." So you have to kind of nearly give him some bit of flack or some bit of kind of slack, I suppose, in it, because
true.
The rookies that have come through these days are world champion spec riders already. So so he's more of a conventional rider. Probably will take maybe 2 or 3 years before he can actually challenge for title. But I have been impressed what he can do this year again. Another fast young Italian coming through. We need some more of them, don't we? We're really lacking with the Italians these days.
Yes, there's no Italians in MotoGP. It's terrible.
Yes, sad sight.
But anyway, that was the battle at the front. Somebody that you'd expect to be there was Daniel Holgado. And again, like you were saying earlier with the David Alonso, we could just snip apart from another podcast and just put it in here. How many times have we said Holgado just didn't turn up one weekend? We were literally saying last weekend, we were looking at the points and figuring it out and saying he has second in the championship in the bag. And, well, he doesn't have it in the bag anymore. The points gap has decreased massively because he was nowhere. He was absolutely nowhere this race. I don't think I even really seen him. I think maybe it showed him a couple of times. He wasn't in the lead group. He wasn't just off the back of the lead group either. He was absolutely miles back. Maybe he was struggling a little bit in these conditions. There was a few damp patches in the middle sector, so maybe it put him off. I know Scott Ogden was saying that was a big issue for him personally. He was quite disappointed that it had rained previously, so maybe Holgado was feeling the same thing. But again, it's sort of like with Alonso, you kind of run out of ways to say this because we've said this so many times about Holgado. He's pretty much there most weeks, but then he just disappears sometimes for like no reason and it's absolutely nowhere. And that's what's going to cost him in the end. It's what cost him last season. It's what's cost him the championship this season. Well, I mean, no one was really beating Alonso this season, but if you were there week in, week out, you always finish a second to him. It puts him under a bit more pressure, whereas if you're 11th one race, he gains like a load of points on you. So yeah, Holgado, again, another anonymous weekend, and I feel like moving up to Moto2, he really does need to try and get on top of that if he's going to try and fight for a Moto2 championship or something, which obviously would be his aim, going into the Aspar team and obviously fighting for the championship the last couple of years in Moto3, but it just seems like a weakness for him. He just turns up some tracks he obviously doesn't gel with, or some weekends he doesn't get the feeling, and he just doesn't have any pace at all.
Yeah, P12 from today, like so, and then you're talking about Artola and Vire third and fourth. So after we pretty much condemned him to be P2 in the world last time out, that's a massive drop. And again, we still have 2 races left, like so. There's still a lot of points up for grabs at the moment. Again, I don't want to repeat myself, like, but it's same old Holgado. Really, he has potential. He just doesn't seem to be able to use it week in, week out. He has 11 points over Vire now. He's probably still okay from Artola because Artola is 32 points back. So, like, unless he really, like, if Artola passes him, he's fourth in the world. He's not even going to be not second because Vire is definitely will pass him because there's only 11 to Vire. So, yeah, it's been an interesting season for Holgado. I think he's been better probably overall, but I think the fact that Alonso's been so dominant probably maybe not had the same look about him. If you remember last year, like it was just like night and day. Like he was Sergio Garcia again. Like I hate to keep bringing Sergio down, unfortunately, but it was the exact same thing. It was just one weekend. It didn't go his way. It was Assen. He crashed in Assen last year, I believe, on the last sector on the run to the fast part of the track. And
double rise, wasn't it, where he went down? I remember him like trying to get out the gravel.
But from there on, like he just was not the same rider. And then some of the later parts of the year, he kind of turned up with a surprise result. But that was it. It was a surprise result when he was fast. So this year he has been better, but he still clearly hasn't gotten over the fact that he shouldn't beat P12. Like, for example, some of the riders he finished behind. Again, this is no disrespect to these riders, but like this is a guy who's second in the world. He's behind Scott Ogden straight away, screams in the middle. Stefano Nepa is quick but inconsistent. Suzuki.
Suzuki, he's back. Had a terrible season, really.
Yeah, so he's battling people that he shouldn't be battling. And again, other riders can have good weekends and it can make it more difficult for you. But for me at the moment, I actually wonder, right? I feel watching him on the bike, he's slightly bigger than your average Model 3 rider. I wonder, is there a slight bit in him that like at certain tracks he can make the difference with, and there's maybe a bit of a weight issue and height issue? I don't know exactly but I just feel like on the bike he looks like a slightly taller lad than the most of the Moto 3 field. So maybe not as big as some, like we'd say. I know, for example, if you go back to Bob Benstein when he was on Moto 3 bike, he really made it look ridiculously smaller than him. But I wonder, will he seem to make a jump to Moto 2, and then the extra kind of height and weight, will he benefit from that? Because I think he showed his ability in Moto 3, but he hasn't showed what he can do over a full season, because we've yet to see him put a season together, which is a bit of a shame considering he's been in good teams and he's going into another good team this year, or for 25 we'll say. So for me, he has to get these demons sorted and be able to consistently be a top 10, top 5 rider every week. Fair enough, you don't need to be winning races every week, nobody can really do that, but his consistency really is key at the moment, and it's just not there. And he's not going to win any Grand Prix level championship. He'll win a race here and there. He might keep in the class and kind of float around, but unless you're week in, week out keeping 10, 20 points on a board, you're really going to struggle to see any kind of fruit at the end of the tunnel with that one, because it's just a weird one, because he has so much ability, and I actually rate him quite a bit. And then you go 12th today, and I remember the camera cut to him. I was like, I kind of forgot he was in the class. Like one of those things where you just forget about him, because he just does. It's not a surprise. Like I don't look. I gotta go. Like, oh, really, I don't know what's on with this weekend. He really seemed to struggle. Maybe it's a bike issue. You're like, yeah, that's just, he just does that. Like that's just kind of him. So I'm hoping he can fix it, because there's a very good rider in there, and I think consistency is probably. Isn't there an old saying that you can't make a slow rider go fast, you can stop them crashing, and you can make a fast rider stop crashing? So he has probably the whole package in there. He just needs to get some of the rough edges and file them down, and he could be a very good Moto 2 rider, because again, I still think he is just slightly bit taller than the rest, but overall I'd say he just needs another reset, I suppose, as we like to say, just kind of summer break, winter break, take a little reset, and then come back for 25 and try and have a good pre-season and just start the season well for his Moto 2 campaign.
It's a bit Fodger-esque, isn't it? Some weekends just
very much,
really fast,
100%.
And then other weekends there's no, obviously not size-wise. It's basically the opposite.
Yeah, probably on the other end of the scale.
Yeah, probably.
Hopefully he does more in Moto 2 than Fodger is doing, as all I'd say.
Yeah, hopefully so, because it's not really gone well for Dennis, that particular step. So Holgado, not in the lead group, but meanwhile in the lead group, we did mention it briefly earlier, the incident at the final corner. It's worth noting, because it's actually quite interesting, because I learned that there's a new rule change today, so it's always an interesting one to bring up. But into the last corner, Colin Vire, pretty much as he always does, thinking intelligently, sort of sits back, lets everyone sort of dive into the last corner and just let them run wide, tries to get the cut back. But unfortunately for me, he then makes a bit of a mistake with that, collects Forasato, knocks Forasato off. He gets on the podium for it, obviously Colin Vire, so for him it worked out pretty well. Feel sorry for Forasato. Did end up actually still getting his position, because he actually went over the line, separated from his bike, which, if you didn't know, used to be basically you weren't counted in the results. It was like not like a black flag. Well, I guess it was a bit like a black flag, disqualified from the race because you had to be in contact with your bike. But now the rule seems to be, if your bike and your rider go over the line, it's whichever part goes over last. So if the bike goes over last, they use the rider. If the rider goes over the other way around, sorry. If the bike goes over last, they'll use the bike. If the rider goes over last, they'll use the rider for the first part.
The easiest way to say it, the last part of the pair of rider or bike cross the line is where the result is taken from.
Yeah, so
that's just the easier way to say it.
And it's the first part of the last part, if that makes sense. So if your foot goes over the line, it's your foot they'll use, or whatever if you're second. But anyway, interesting little rule. I know, obviously, we were talking about this a little bit before the podcast, so I do know a little bit of an idea what you're thinking. But for me, that should have been a penalty. I've criticised a lot of riders for doing similar in the past, but just riding through someone, taking the handlebar, knocking them off. As far as I'm aware, there's not been a penalty, not even anything said. If I didn't even mention it in this interview, which, you could have at least said sorry, even if you didn't really think. But then maybe I suppose that makes you look guilty, so I don't know. Or could have at least mentioned it. But for me, it was a little bit, over the limit, because he just rode through somebody and knocked them off. But interesting to see what you think about that one. But I did feel sorry for Sato because he rode really well in this race. He'd led for a while. Obviously, he got mugged a little bit in that last corner. He had Lunetta at the inside of him, and then Via into the side of him, and obviously Altola running wide at the same time. So maybe there was a little bit with that. But yeah, just for me, seemed like probably a slam dunk penalty, really.
It reminded me of at Lunia last corner. Was it Munoz, and who did Munoz hit that time?
I think it was on Shield, wasn't it?
Yeah, I wasn't sure, and he kind of punted him out. So it's last corner, last lap. There's always a bit of leeway given, but
I'm fairly sure he got a penalty for that on that occasion.
He did, yes, he did. So it just shows the inconsistency there. Where the incident itself just reminded me of that, where the handlebars are taken, but it's just the argument is right. You penalise this, everyone's, you can't race, last lap, can't race, all this kind of crap saying
you
that you can't
knock
race.
Somebody off. That's the problem.
And that's the other side, is so you're just going to be, it's going to be Mario Kart. So, no matter what you do in motorcycle racing, you're going to make 70% of the people unhappy, even if you make the right decision, figure that one out. So, I agree, penalty all day for me. And for Asada, I'm actually starting to take a liking for Asada, another young Japanese rider come through with the R8. That's a big plus for me. So he's having a good season. I think he's been there about most. I think maybe someone at Milestone had a little in on that, a little inside bet with that one. But overall he's been a tidy little rider. It was a shame because, again, I might probably have said it on a podcast, but I was kind of keeping an eye on him for the flyaways, thinking that's his part of the world, and maybe we might see a podium challenge. And here in Thailand, it looked like he was he looked set for the
20
podium.
meters he was.
Yeah, exactly. He already could taste the champagne, but it was unfortunate. I do agree, penalty all day for me, and I can accept the rules if they're consistent. I can't accept anything if it's not. Consistency is key to everything. No matter what field of anything, consistency is the bottom line. And when people aren't consistently giving the same penalties out, and there's changes and there's not any explanations. For example, you mentioned last time there a second ago that a new rule to us, I also didn't know, because nobody bloody, the new rules that come in never get told. They're always like, oh yeah, this is a new rule now that this happens.
That is a rare one, though, to be fair. It happens so rarely. I can remember maybe 2 or 3 instances of it ever happening in the time I've been watching it, and I've been watching it like my entire life basically. So it's not something that happens very rarely. So it kind of just can get, because people would forget the rule anyway, so it'll always get brought up and mentioned every time it happens. But yeah,
I can see that side of it too, but I'd still like to know. Maybe
they probably did announce it.
I can see that.
We could probably go and find it, but we just would never have remembered it. Probably a few years ago.
Yeah, maybe so. But again, just back to the distributing decisions with the collision, it's just about consistency. You can kind of accept maybe not bad decisions, but if they're consistent, I just don't like one rider getting penalised for something that I would class very similar, and then someone getting away with it, because you just feel then it creates a fog for a rider to well, X got away with this one, I did the same thing, got a penalty. Now, why did I get a penalty? What's different to what I did compared to said rider and stuff like that? And you just don't want that. You just want to know that this is black, this is white. There's no grey area. You either are innocent or you're guilty, and bottom line. Now, I'm making it very simple here. I know every decision is difficult, because even if you go back to Phillip Island, I felt Fermin Aldeguer probably was on the end of a penalty for what he did to Canet. But a lot of people just felt it was hard racing in the last lap. So again, 70% of people not agree with you, even though it's 100% of people. So it's just one of those things. I agree that with you that it's for me it is a penalty, but I'm not really sure why they didn't see it as a penalty. Like it seems pretty obvious to me, but I suppose it's easy for me to say that. But he went into the corner behind, came out, took the podium, and took the rider out. Like, what more do you want? Like, touch the green paint while he's at it, I suppose. I'm not really sure. Like, but yeah, it's unfortunate because again, I feel sorry for Fursat, and he also, when he got up, he seemed to be limping, which is like never good. So maybe he's after sustaining a small injury as well, which wouldn't be good with the 2 rounds remaining. So overall, yeah, it's just again inconsistency for insurers. We've probably banged on it, but we're probably 3 years now saying the same kind of stuff, that we just want consistency. We can kind of accept rule changes and different interpretations of incidents if they're just consistent, and that is the hard part, is to keep them consistent, because well, we're still talking about how they're not being kept consistent.
So moving on to Moto 2 then. By the start of this race, track had completely dried. Obviously it was pretty much dry at the start of the Moto 3 race, but after that full sort of set of laps, well, say full set, there was only 12 actually, so it was only 2/3 distance, so maybe not as much as they would have liked, but it was dry starting this race, so it was actually declared dry, which is obviously important, as I guess we find out later. But the first thing that happened in this race, I don't even know how to begin to describe it. Firmin Aldeguer, he must have hit a neutral. There's no way he was actually trying from that far back, but it was about 5 riders back from Tony Arbolino going into, turn 5, is it? I think it's turn 5.
It's classed as turn 4, but it would be in my eyes 5, yeah.
I thought 4 was the fast left, but there you go. Yeah, but anyway, I guess we know which one it is. It's the first left of the stadium, basically.
It's the first awkward stadium corner.
He just comes in, flying in out of nowhere. You can see he's on the back brake, trying to get the bike to stop, just completely crashes into the side of Tony Arbolino, takes them both out on the spot. Poor old Tony had already been injured this weekend by a weird, bizarre incident with Zonta van der Gerberg in the pit lane entry. So Tony was already walking on a crutch. That definitely didn't help. Out on the spot. I think in the last episode of the podcast, I said potentially Aldeguer could still end up second in the championship and just go on a tear and winning everything. Well, he kind of proved me wrong on the very first lap by doing that. I haven't actually seen the results of this because it was to be investigated after the race. I would suggest there will be a penalty coming Aldeguer's way, because that has been the general way they've dealt with this. Again, he came from so far back, looked like maybe he must have missed a gear or something, because you don't try and overtake from like 4 riders back. Like, I know he's done some stupid things this year with passes and stuff, but there's no way he was trying from that far back. I mean, you can barely see him in the shot as you come into the corner. It's crazy. Like, it's absolutely... I remember when they showed the replay of it, I was like, he's back there. How the hell did he even hit Arbolino? And he just absolutely careers into him. It's pretty bad, but we have seen some of the things. Sam Lowe's always stands out, the Austria incident he had with Chantra. I think Chantra had his own little incident where he did the same thing. I think it's actually two Lowe's, actually.
Texas.
His revenge a few years later at Texas. So we have seen it where they hit these neutrals and they can't control. And to me, that's what it looked like, but I don't know what. So strange. And obviously another dot on his copybook, and I do feel for Arbolino because he was already walking wounded, and that wouldn't have helped.
The only argument I have against the false neutral is that corner is a second gear corner, so you're not going down past neutral. So unless it's some sort of mechanical...
Could it go past second
where
if you're going into second? If you put too far down, could you then hit into neutral? Because between
you could,
first,
in theory,
that was what I thought.
Could.
They said that on the commentary, but I thought, I'm pretty sure you can do that.
Like a miss shift, double shift, you could technically.
You do a click and a half instead of just one click.
I suppose maybe the
it
way
is an up click as well, isn't it? I guess. No, actually, they are stock boxes, so I guess it is the
stock boxes, way. But they will be down, up. Like all you have to do to, like, a stock gearbox doesn't decide which way you have to go up and down again. That's just off the shift linkage. That can be reversed. Like, you could do it on a road bike. It's not
I see.
It isn't like the what's known as ray shift, where you go up into first and then down. That's not a fancy thing. That's just a lever that you reverse so that when you press it down, it goes up instead and just changes the way you shift. But
so it's easier to do half a click up than down. So maybe that's why. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, unless there's some serious, like, unfortunate where he somehow managed to jump out of a gear and somehow get himself into neutral. But for me, I think I feel like he's maybe slightly misjudged the rider in front, has to jump to the inside, and maybe has missed a downshift, as in he's in third gear, has very little engine brake, and is kind of panicked with the rear brake and hasn't gone to go downshifting. I think that's what it, because he just comes in. The way I see it, he has very little engine braking because the bike's running on so fast. He's standing on the rear brake, so the rear wheel is locking, and it's just kind of skidding in, and he goes straight inside of him. I think it's more. We've talked a lot over the last couple of years and pretty much all throughout the Calyx, or not the Calyx, sorry, the Moto2 life cycle of how the false neutrals are present, and until we get some sort of tricked out gearboxes, they're probably always going to be somewhat there and an issue. I don't think this is one person. I think this is Fermin Aldeguer. I think he has this in his locker still. Now again, it probably will come out to be some sort of technicality because the team will probably try to cover him more than anything. But I don't see it. I see it as a Fermin incident more than a mechanical. But either way, really, really unfortunate for Arbolino. It's just one of those weekends. The whole Zonta incident was just weird. There's only the one shot, which is the head-on one, which it just confuses me every time I watch it because it looks like Zonta is slowing down. It looks like you're seeing him, and then he just hits him at a rate of knots, and you think, what's going on there? So yeah, it was just a horrible weekend for Arbolino. Gets a leg run over and then gets taken out in the opening lap of the main race. So unfortunately for him, it's just a kind of a sad end to his season, really, because it was a year he came in with high expectations. Because to be honest, we came into this year, everyone was thinking it was Aldeguer's to lose, which he has, and everyone else was kind of like, there's a couple of riders that could be close to him, and Arbolino's one of those riders, but just hasn't had that season really. And I think he has built a bit of form, but I think it's just he's quite an unlucky rider in the grand scheme of things. And at the moment, I feel sorry for him. I'm hoping he can just have a decent few rides at the end of the season and then just go away. And again, I'm going to say it probably more classes reset, because I think he has a potentially maybe not a championship winning year with the riders that will be in there next year with him, but I definitely think he'll be there or thereabouts. Hopefully better than this year for his sake. But to kind of finish up with the incident, I think it's all pretty much on an Aldeguer mistake more than a mechanical. I just don't see. I'd see him making a much bigger mistake and running on and taking someone out than him somehow managed to getting it into a neutral at that point. So, because the way I looked at it, he's come from so far back that he wouldn't have even gotten to second yet. So I don't think how he could have got down past second. So again, we'll probably hear about it in coming days. But as always, we've seen pistons come out the side of blocks and people are down to electrical issues. So teams will always kind of just skew the truth to kind of protect themselves and their rider and stuff. So we'll probably never know the truth. But for my 2 cents, I think it's for me an Aldeguer oversight and mistake on his behalf.
Yep, that's fair enough. I think we both sort of agree that it's probably a penalty coming his way, and
I agree.
Likely a penalty to be served in the MotoGP class, because he has actually been declared unfit after that incident. So I think that could be the end of Aldeguer's season. With that incident, I think he's done an injury to his arm, so I can't imagine he'll be racing next weekend. And then I think there's doubts over Valencia as well, so it could potentially be the end of his Moto2 career, which would sum up his season pretty much. And
100%, yeah.
Yeah, like you said, with Arbolino, he's been injured, so it could be the end of his season potentially too, because he was already pushing through it. So I imagine if he hasn't picked up any more injuries, he probably will carry on. But yeah, just an unfortunate way for both their races to end. And yeah, I imagine some sort of penalty coming the way of Fermin Aldeguer. Now, the rider is actually battling for second in the championship with Aaron Canet. Another really good ride. This sort of, I was going to say second half of the season, but this is the last run of like 5 races or so. Canet has just been really, really good, really, really consistent, which is not ever anything you've said about Aaron Canet before. He started off the season quite well, sort of dropped off in the middle, kind of stopped talking about him for a long, long period in the season, but these last few races, he's been so good. The win at Indonesia, obviously the second win, he took another win today, so he's now got 3 wins this season, the same amount as Aldeguer, same amount as Iagora, which is crazy. The guy that's won the championship, he's second, probably looking quite solid for that second in the championship now after another poor race for Sergio Garcia, another poor race for Alonso Lopez, another poor race for Aldeguer. It's looking more and more now like Canet's going to get second in the championship, and I think well deserved, because aside from Misano really, which obviously only cost him 5 points the last, but maybe half a season really, because he was again really good at Silverstone as well. Aragon was a bit of a off weekend for him. He crashed really early on, but he was looking fast there till that. He has just been so good, and he's really starting to control these races from the front as well. In the past, we've seen him try and make these gaps and just shred his tyre or make a mistake and crash or make a mistake and run wide or whatever, but he seems to have sort of got the hang of this now, especially in some of these greasy races like Mandalika, for example, where the grip is not there. He just head and shoulders above the rest of them, and fair play to Canet, because I didn't think he was... Well, we always thought he was capable of some really good things, some great results, but I just didn't think he'd click, because he just never seemed like it was happening. But the second half of the season, it just seems to be really good, and he definitely going to be one of the favourites for the title next year with the way he's ending this season, because he looks just so fast at every single weekend, and clearly shown now that he can fight for wins, he can lead from the front, he can take the second place when he needs to, which obviously we've seen him do that a lot of times, but he can sort of choose to do it rather than out of necessity. And yeah, really, really been impressed with these last few rounds of the Canet.
Yeah, I must say I do love someone who turns around, because as much as we talk about Holgado not being able to do what we think he can do, Canet's another rider where he's a bit of a head scratcher, but I'm delighted to say that he's been really impressive over the last 4 months, I'd say. 4 months, I'd say. I take out the mistake, Mazzano, again, one mistake over 4 months that I'd see. He crashed on a very difficult racetrack in Aragon where the conditions were appalling the whole weekend, and had a weird crash where the rear end came round and he kind of banged his head there, so even and all that, he got a bit of a wallop as well. And it looked like maybe Igor could have caught him if the red flag didn't come, but nonetheless, you could still argue that Canet could have fought to nail it against Igor, especially with the championship on the line. I'd imagine I probably would have, if he caught him, would have tried. If Canet put up a fight, he'd probably like, yeah, P2 will do. I don't need to lose the championship over a race when I've tried that before. So I'm just really impressed with Canet. I really hope that, one, he finishes the season strongly, and two, has a good, safe winter, doesn't get injured, because he is one of those guys where, like, he had a bad car crash. Was it last year before?
I think it was the year
before Assen.
I think it was when he was on the Ponds bike. Oh,
he had a rough.
I
feel like it was last year in that team.
Yeah. Or
it was
either last year or the year before.
It
was one of the years he was with them anyway.
He was having a decent season that year, and then just after that he was getting nosebleeds while riding. He was in a lot of discomfort, so you just would like to see what he can really achieve, because again, if we go back to his junior career, he came into Moto 3 straight into Stella Galizia, which is one of the, at the time, was probably one of the A-tier class teams, so he really was hot property, and I feel like deep down he probably has suffered from that, and I think now we're only seeing, after him getting the first win, getting nearly what I was classed as the first win again in the second time around when he got it in Mandalika, and then today probably was going to win it again today. But the fact is, he just, every weekend he seems to be fast, and he seems, I can't believe I'm going to say it, he's consistent, he's not crashing that out, and he's always been a good qualifier. He's a great man over one lap, so I'm excited for Canet's 2025 season, the Moto 2 class next year, with Dixon jumping seat. We have a couple of interesting rookies, second year in the Pirellis. I think Calix will make a bit of a stab back at Bosco Scuros, more Bosco Scuros on the grid. It's going to be a very interesting season, I think, next year for Moto 2. And out of the three classes, Moto 2 has been my standout this year. I've really enjoyed it, which is, I think, credit to Pirelli, because Moto 2 used to be the one where, like, right, if I've anything to do now for next hour, I'll kind of put on Moto 2 in the background, and I'll keep an ear out for when someone does something, and I might tip away on my computer and do a few bits. But thankfully now Moto 2 has turned into a very interesting prospect, and I think next year, just everything that it's building in it, and again, I think Canet can be very, very much a front runner next year. Whether he can win a title, I don't know, because even though he's had this good run, I still think that if he was up against Dixon in a championship hunt, you still think that there's probably a bit of a mistake, and he still has a bit to learn, a bit to grow, because he's, I think, spent so long trying to get the win that he's so much focus on that if he ends up in a championship battle, will he be able to handle that? Because we haven't really seen that in his Moto 3 days. He never really, he was similar to what he was, where he was ultra quick, really good qualifying, and just made some weird decisions and just didn't maybe get the run of the green at all times. But I'm really happy to see him actually doing well now, because again, it's just good to see someone who has the talent, who's probably not had the best couple of years and rode off, and there's a lot of stuff going on outside the track, and he's really showing at the moment that He is a quality Grand Prix racer, and maybe we might see him in GP in the years to come. I know there is some doubts on his end because of his tattoos and stuff, but I don't think personally that would be enough of an issue. It's always been down to his lack of consistency, which he seems to be at the moment, touch wood, getting a bit of a handle on.
Yeah, he really does seem to have turned it around. I'm not so sure about him versus Dixon in a title fight. They've both got a lot of mistakes in them, so it's a bit like Bagnaia and Martin, I guess. Would be that, I think that kind of championship fight with the who crashes this week kind of thing. So yeah, not too sure about that. The only concern I have about Moto2 is that this same kind of thing happened when the Triumph came in. It became a much more interesting class. There's a lot more of these better races, a really good championship fight, and then after a couple of seasons it kind of went back to how it was before once they kind of got on top of it. So I do fear that maybe the same kind of thing can happen once they get on top of these Pirellis, but I guess we'll have to see. A lot of new riders coming in, a lot of people changing teams, a lot of teams taking Bosco Seguro, so there is a lot of change for next year still. So again, that probably will shake things up quite a bit. Obviously, some of the top guys moving on. Well, the championship winner moving on anyway, and the 12th in the championship moving on. That will obviously change things quite a bit. But obviously, Canet was out front winning that one. Ramirez, though, Marcos Ramirez, the fellow Spaniard, kind of been a bit anonymous this year. If you remember the back end of last year, obviously he moved from the forward team to the American Racing, took Sean Dillon Kelly's ride, put in some really good performances at the end of that season, was pretty much up there consistently, qualifying very well, top fives, did manage to get a podium at Malaysia, but pretty much since then, been very, very anonymous, but coming to this circuit, seemed to click a little bit again, really had some good pace, and just managed to hang on to the podium. I'm sure the locals weren't too happy to see that, but we'll talk about that in a second. But just a little shout out to Marcos Ramirez, really. I think it was a solid little ride. Good to see him back towards the front, because I kind of expected to see this performance a bit more from him this year because of the performances he was having at the back end of last year, to be honest.
I feel slight maybe question mark over that team. They seem to run hot and cold. Now you could say maybe it's our riders that run hot and cold, but we've seen, like, when's the last time we've talked or said anything positive about Joe Roberts?
Well, he was out even this weekend with the crash he had in the practice, and Navarro was in his place.
True, so, but yeah. It's just his dip in performance. Like, so he's so, the fact he was out doesn't even cover up the fact that he's so invisible in the class at the moment after having such, like, remember Mugello where we're all like, oh, he's after taking the Champions League. Can he actually win
basically?
It? That was pretty much, yeah. Like, he was fast and
as soon as he lost the MotoGP ride, he's just a bit like Arbolino last year for me.
Absolutely imploded. But you'd wonder again, like in such a tight class as Moto2, where same engine, same tires, pretty much. I think was basically the only thing that's different between some of the Calixes is the exhaust. And that will maybe just give slight different characteristics in throttle and feel and stuff like that, but it's not going to make it. You're not going to make an extra 15 horsepower by running a Akrapovic versus a Scorpion, or just for an example. Like, so you're not going to, at the top level there, it's going to be so tight. But he's a talented rider. I always, when he was in that forward team, I always wondered how such a talented rider ended up in such a don't want to say back runner, like, but kind of a uncompetitive, unconventional team. But when he signed for them, showed really good speed and just showed the rider he is. And then I was like, yeah, that's more like it. And then this year, up until this race, my only memory is when his teammate tried to overtake him and crashed, and that was probably my main memory of him. He's had a rough year. Again, we probably forget that this is the first year of the Pirellis. It's been such a long year that it feels like we've been on Pirellis for the last 7 years, so maybe if he's just taking a bit more time to adapt to the Pirellis than most. But hopefully after a weekend like that, he can bounce on and keep up the kind of good performance. Because again, I'm going to say about everywhere, if they can finish the season well, go into the winter break and kind of stay afloat, it'll give him a good platform for next year. And I think if people can actually a good winter and kind of reflect and understand, especially after such a big change as the Pirelli tires have been in that class, it'll be interesting to see who will be the big winners and losers of the 25 season, when we've seen kind of everything kind of come to a halt for 24.
Yeah, it will certainly be interesting to see how the people make the change over the winter, because of course, like you say, it's taken some riders a while to get used to it. But I think sometimes they have the full season, they've got the winter to think about it, they get the pre-season testing, they've got some stuff to try. and you do see some people make a step. So we could see potentially Ramirez making that step back towards the front. But like you say, the team, there are definitely question marks of the team because Joe Roberts' form's been pretty yo-yo-y, and they've never really had a consistent rider at the front, aside from obviously Joe earlier on this season. And I mean, Joe himself
as well. Their
pretty
ethics
yo-yo.
aren't always the best, like the way they treated Sean and Kelly, and it's just like there's always the way Hopkins has left the team as well. So like there's just
a lot of complaints about the fact that it wasn't American either that was brought in to replace Joe for this round. It was Navarro, which for me, I think just makes sense. Just get a solid Moto2 rider on there that won't crash your bike, basically. So I don't actually have a problem with that personally, but yeah, there were some complaints about that.
Again, 70% of people will always be unhappy. So
yeah, that's true.
Unfortunately, you just like no matter.
You can't.
You could have stuck Kevin Schwantz on that bike, and people would be like, "Oh well, like why do we get him in?" Like, or there's always going to be someone unhappy, like no matter what you do. So just is the way of life, really. And it's unfortunate that in today's times that just because everything is so echoed through social media and other forms of media that we just we probably see more of the negative than we see of the positive a lot of time, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I think you bang on with that one. But something that was positive this weekend, Motogp Xtra, obviously been sort of missing the last couple of rounds. Obviously, unfortunately, got his foot run over in Mandalika by Firmin Aldeguer. Then after that in Motegi, he picked up a bit of an illness, so he sat that race out. So I think a bit of a combination of the foot and because he was actually declared fit after the foot incident, which is a surprise. But anyway, a bit of a combination of that and illness put him out of both Motegi and Phillip Island. Back here this weekend for his home Grand Prix. Of course, he was going to try and perform here. Had a special livery. I actually quite like it. I thought it was quite a really nice livery. Didn't really have the pace most of the weekend, but in the race, he certainly did. He came through. Did he start 12th on the grid, I think? Something like that. Fought his way through up to 4th. Was actually closing on Marcos Ramirez just before the rain came down. And he closed up to about second behind him. I think he would have probably got that podium because there was about 3 laps to go. But unfortunately for Motogp, the rain came down too hard. Red flags came out. You could see he wasn't happy. He was waving his arms about. He was obviously hoping for that podium at home, which would have been lovely for the crowd. But even still, good to see him performing at his home round. Obviously, good to see him sort of back towards the sharp end because obviously he's about to go to MotoGP, and you really, really don't want to see a rider that's struggling in their current class and moving up to MotoGP where they're going to really struggle. It's going to be a big adaptation period as it is. You don't want any confidence lacking, so it's good to see that Motogp's clearly obviously sort of recovering as well. He's actually still got the pace in him at a track that he really does like, able to perform at the pressure at home, and obviously come 6 months time, I guess he'll be, I don't even think it's 6 months, probably less than that, he'll be here once again, and this time as a MotoGP rider, and I'm sure the crowd will absolutely love it. But a solid race for Motogp. Not the best weekend. I think he would have been hoping for that podium, but overall, from my side, really, really good race.
I actually, for once, disagree with the livery. I thought it was just messy. I first saw it and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And then the more I was like, it's just messy. It just looked messy. But again, I'm all for a special livery, regardless if I like it or not. I just like seeing something different. It's such a shame because didn't he miss out in the heavy rain? Was it last year?
There was one year where he was leading
well,
and he crashed, didn't he? That's what happened.
Yeah, and then there was a red flag a lap or two later. So
22, but I can't remember.
Yeah, it must have been because remember last year was scorching for the GP race, so that must have been 2 years ago. But I feel like he's been so close to having a podium at home a few times now, and he's just missed out. So really unfortunate because you see as soon as he saw that flag, he was throwing his hands around and he was frustrated because I think he had the bit between his teeth. I think he was destined for P3. But look, it's good to see him finding a bit of form at home, and he'll be back again here in about 4.5 months, I suppose, by the time we get back here. And he'll be on a fire-breathing GP bike there, so he'll have something to look forward to. But it's just good to see him find a bit of form because he was announced at the week, running up to the week. He's been signed by Red Bull now, so he's a Red Bull athlete. So a lot happening in his world at the moment. So it was good that he could have a good result at home, maybe not the result he wanted, but still nonetheless a P4 at home in that grid is no mean feat.
Yeah, it looked like it was 22 where he crashed at the lead. Last year he was on the podium there, so actually it was a shame for him that he wasn't able to back that one up. But yeah, like you say, he's going to be focusing now, I suppose. Now that he's got his home race out of the way, he's not really got anything to fight for in the championship. He's going to be fully focused on rehab, ready for that MotoGP and coming back here once again in the test, and then obviously, of course, the main race. But one of his best mates, the other MotoGP graduate as well for next year, former flatmates, teammates, everything, Chantra and Agora has been really close, but Agora is the world champion. We've been saying it for the last few episodes now that it is a done deal. It is eyes to lose. Coming into this weekend, after a good race at Phillip Island where he wasn't quite on the pace, all he had to do was finish in the top 5, which is easier said than done, don't get me wrong, but for someone that's been consistently in that top 5, it's no pressure really. He's just got to do a normal weekend. I think he very much could have won this race if it wasn't for, one, the rain coming down, because he was catching Canet before it started to rain, and then he clearly backed off quite a lot, and two, Alonso Lopez absolutely nerfing him out of the way on the first lap because he was running in second place before that, and then he was down to about 6th or 7th, and obviously that basically completely changes your race. But obviously a lot of history being made today. First Japanese champion since Hiroshi Ayama back in 2009. First Bosco Scuro championship. Teams Championship also been wrapped up for the MT Helmets team as their first year in Moto2 as well, which I don't think gets mentioned enough, but that's extremely impressive. I mean, MT Helmets as a team in general has not been around very long. They've only been Moto3 a couple of years, and before that they were a junior GP team. But to win the Teams Championship, to win the Riders Championship the first year in Moto2 is just phenomenal. I mean, of course, a lot of that comes down to Agora, but the team have been running well. They've destroyed the speed-up team that effectively have been using Bosco Seguros for the last decade because it is their chassis. So all the data they've got to beat them is just phenomenal. Agora has been really good all season. It has been one of those strange seasons where there have been periods of different people winning, and obviously his win tally only being at 3, which obviously is impressive itself, but a lot of the times for world champions you do get the higher win totals, but he's won his championship a lot more through consistently being up there, not crashing like a lot of the others have been, or having off weekends. Agora has been delivering pretty much since Le Mans. He struggled a little bit before that. He wasn't qualifying well, but he's sort of, everything that's been thrown at him, he's been able to bounce back from. He's won races in different ways. He's sorted out his qualifying. He's had quite a few pole positions. He was on pole position this round, in fact, so just showing that the pressure wasn't getting to him. I guess also by settling for that second place, he showed he wasn't going to make the same mistake. We can finally stop talking about Malaysia, Dill. We can finally stop talking about it. Agora, he's made up for 2022. What a season he's had, and really happy to see that he's managed to bring it home. And also, I think it is really good for the championship that the Kalex run has ended and now there is competition, because it seems like at this point of the season, the bikes are pretty much level, and it just depends on who's the best rider on the day.
Yeah, I think at the moment you'd probably put the money on the better riders or on the Bosco Scuro speed up chassis. I think it's just a matter of some weekends now that we have the Kalex, Olin's, WP, all that kind of mix up. I think there's quite a bit of change in Moto2, but Agora's been brilliant this year. He started the season slowly. He found himself that his biggest issue, or his biggest strength, I should say, on the Dunlops is he was brilliant at slowing the bike down. He said he couldn't brake in the same way on the Pirellis at the start of the year. I remember his early season, he was just struggling to make the lap time. Race pace was always there, even from the very first few rounds. His race pace was good. It's just he was qualifying 18th and finishing 9th and that kind of thing, so he just wasn't really seeing much. But he's been brilliant. He would have wrapped it up earlier if it wasn't for his injury and that kind of weird, strange Silverstone race where he probably maybe had a chance of winning it and just must have had some sort of weird tire mechanical issue. So it's brilliant that he's got it done, and I'm a massive Agora fan. I can't wait to see him on in Aprilia next year. I think it'll be really, really promising and interesting prospect for 25. I think Aprilia have done a really good job there, because nearly everywhere he goes, he's fast, he's consistent, and he just seems to kind of get on with his racing, and there's no drama with him. He's a good young man, and he's done the country of Japan proud. I think Honda themselves will be probably a little bit thinking we've lost out on this guy. I'd imagine if we'll say for 27, 26, 27, maybe not 26, 27, 28 maybe, if Honda are on the way back up, they might have some sort of not contract or clause with him, but I'd imagine they will have some way of getting him back. I'd say he probably,
they'll always
Japanese
be a
are
link,
running for
won't they?
So yeah, exactly. An Italian on a Ducati, a Japanese rider on a Honda. It's just one of those things. So I think he's just been brilliant this year, and I'm really happy he's gotten it over the line after what happened 2 years ago. He's probably, in my eyes, could have had 3 championships. I think he should have won I feel maybe not as hard done about his Moto 3 championship to Arenas, but definitely a massive loss in the 1 in 22. But he's finally gotten one now, so fair play to him, and I'm just really happy for him because he's a solid rider and well deserved at this point. It's great to get his first World Championship.
So on to MotoGP now then, and history once again being made in the sprint race in MotoGP. I actually can't believe this because there was a similar stat to this last weekend for the main GP, but this one is even more ridiculous. The top 8 riders were a Ducati lockout, and obviously, if you guys know, there is 8 Ducatis in the race, so every single Ducati were in the top 8 positions. Even the GP23, last year's bike, was better than every other bike. I mean, it is crazy the domination we're seeing with Ducati right now. Do you think this is the peak domination? I've even got in the notes here more dominant than Honda. I wasn't around in the 500, so I don't know exactly how many races like the NSR was just like the top 5 or whatever, but I also know that there was a big difference between the NSR that Doohan would have been on compared to someone in the satellite team, like potentially Alzamora or somebody like that. In one of those lower teams, or Puig, not in the factory team, but on a Honda still, potentially. But even still, I think for me, this is the most dominant manufacturer I've ever seen in MotoGP with a race like that, because in the competitive environment we're in now, where everyone's so good, and if you're slightly off it, you just lose out, to get the top 8 bikes all being from the same manufacturer, it's just crazy, and they were miles ahead of everybody else, and it's just so strange because it's like as if the other manufacturers haven't even made a step forward. I mean, you look here last year, the KTM was on the GP23, like it was fighting, but Binder was fighting for the win with Martin and Bagnaia. Yet a year later, they come with the same bike, and the KTM is like 10 seconds off not 10 seconds off the back of the nearest rider. I don't know how far they would have been off the last Ducati, but they were 13 seconds off the win, and behind all the GP23s again. So in the space of a year, they've actually gone backwards. They've not even made progress on the GP23 Ducati.
For me, I don't think it's the most dominant ever, because I think it's kind of, again, this is why it's hard to argue different eras, because if you go back to the 500 era, you're exactly right. The full factory bikes, like, again, no, just off the top of my head, I know a really an easy story to get across is when Rossi went to Yamaha. His teammate basically had last year's spec bike because they were pumping everything into giving Valentino every new bit that they had. It was given straight to him, and by the end of the year, he finally kind of got somewhere similar to what Valentino started with in 04. So if you go back that far, the disparity in equipment is so large that if we saw 7 or how many ever Honda NSRs that were the equivalent of Doohan's bike, you probably would have seen this sooner. Now, it's still absolutely nothing to take away from Ducati, because I think they've dominated. They've built near perfect bikes for the last, since 2018, 2019. I think they just went out doing Davi disrespect. Probably more respect for Marquez than disrespecting Davi, that Davi just wasn't good enough to beat Marquez. I think that's fair, because I think Ducati have had a Honda beating bike for years. It's just there was one guy standing in the way, and that was Mark. I think now that we've seen Mark dethroned and he's gone elsewhere, and we saw Pecco basically come in, and he's has the strengths of Davi, but has a bit more about him, has a bit more of the complete package about him, in some sense, that he's managed to go on and get all these race wins for them. Of course, Argentin's won races for them. Zarco's won a race. There's been many races won by other riders even over the last couple of years. So they've just made a bike in this era where it's such a finicky era. They've made a bike that it seems to work in pretty much everyone's hands. And if you get it working, like you can look at Digia, we for 85% last year thought he was just out of his seat, and he wasn't going to make it and cut it at GP level, and that the GP22 in his hands wasn't going to be enough, and he was 2 laps away from a podium again today for me. So he's just a perfect example that, like, even the most extreme riders, because he has a setup that's outside what Ducati would call their setup window, so that the bike will work from this spring rate to this spring rate, and we wouldn't go further than this many clicks on compression, for example. They'll have a guideline of where you'd like the bike to be, and Digia has to actually go past that to get feeling and a good understanding of the bike, and he learned that very late last year and almost cost him his GP career. But it just shows that the bike is so good that it can even technically work outside its operating window, and they've probably made the sport slightly more boring because there's so many of them, and they're nearly impossible to race each other. But at the same time, look where they've come from. They've come from having a bike that was incredibly flawed, having something now that no matter what the condition, track condition, weather, temperatures, like even during the peak of the Honda Yamaha, we'd say from like 09 to like 2016, we'll say, just kind of bulky years there where they fought. There was always temperatures. The hot temperatures always suited the Hondas. The Honda would just find more grip. When it was a nice cool day, the Yamaha would sing and it would be much better. So you'd come into a race weekend, oh, we're going to Brno this weekend. We know that the track conditions are only going to be 18 degrees on Sunday. It's going to be a real cold day. You'd straight away think, oh, that's going to benefit the Yamahas. Where, like, give me a situation where you go, oh, that's not going to benefit the Ducati. If it rains, they win. If it's bone dry, if it's cold, if it's hot, if it's like maybe like I would say Sachsenring is probably still a weak track, like, but like they were 1-2 with Pecco Martin up until the last laps. Martin or Marquez
they still blocked out the podium, so
the two Marquezes exactly like so. Even it's just they have such a march, and in the current rule sets they just have it perfected, and until the rule changes, we're not going to see any shift. And even I think like I've said this before, that I don't think the rule changes has gone far enough. So I still think we'll see Ducati domination personally, but hopefully the less aero and the less gizmos, it'll just bring it closer. And a traditional manufacturer, a Yamaha or a Honda, can make a bit of a step back. But yeah, I'd still say that I probably would put Honda as the most dominant ever, because I felt like they did it for much longer. They dominated all the two-stroke era. Well, not all of it, but we'll say they dominated all of Dune's two-stroke era. After we'll say really Schwanson Rainey era, then there was just the Dune era. Then alright, fair enough, there was 1 year of when Kenny Roberts won it. You can nearly argue that a few too many mistakes for Valentino cost him in his rookie year. Then Valentino wins it for a couple of years with the V5 and the last of the 500. So they had such a long streak there where one small blip, fair enough, and until Valentino got a Yamaha, the V5 was the bike. And you'd still argue that what Mark did in 2018-19 versus Ducati on the Honda is exactly what we saw previous with Valentino on that Yamaha versus the V5s of Sette, Nicky, we had Melandri, we had Barros, we had Caparossi. There was so many. I suppose they probably weren't all on the Honda against him in the years he was at Yamaha, but he was up against them guys on a weaker equipment at the time. So I think Ducati are probably, that GP 23, 24 kind of fiasco is probably as close to the late 500s and the V5 in terms of dominance, but at the moment I'd still put it to the Honda just because of how many years they did it. But we could look back in another 5 years time when we see the rule changes and Ducati make even further of a step, and then we go, oh no, what have we done?
I suppose, yeah, can you say it's a dominant bike though if it didn't win most of the championships it competed in, the Honda V5? So, you know, it's one of those things.
Yeah, true.
It's not truly dominant if it can be overthrown by just one guy on a different bike. I know Rossi obviously was fantastic, but you know, if you put Marquez on not a Ducati now, well, even Marquez on the old Ducati can't even win the championship. So, yeah, you have to be on the GP24, otherwise you can't win. So, I suppose that's
true.
What I meant. But yeah, it's interesting because it's an interesting debate. There's not a right or wrong answer. I'm sure if you go back to Ago's day, you would say MV Agusta was the most dominant manufacturer.
Yeah.
Like that. So, you know, it's. Depends what era you pick from, depends what you're defining as dominant. Is it the fact that there's that many bikes, that they can make that many good bikes, or is it that even if you made one super duper duper awesome bike just for one rider and they win by 30 seconds, is that more dominant? You know, I suppose it depends where you're coming from with that one, but it kind of tells you a lot about the sprint, if that's the only thing really there is to talk about it, was the Ducati Top 8 lockout. Not a lot else happened. So we'll move pretty much on to the main race, which was tricky conditions. We've not had, it was a proper wet race. We haven't had I was probably going to be like, we haven't had a proper wet race for so long, and then it was like 2 rounds ago or something. But I'm trying to think. I don't think we've had a proper wet race in that aspect, where it was wet from start to finish. You know, not just a little shower like there was in Misano, where obviously Martin dived into the pits, like literally from lap 1 to lap 30, completely wet. You know, there weren't talks of changing bikes or anything like that. The rain let up or whatever, but the track didn't dry. So I think the first time we've had that for a while, which always spices things up a little bit. I was quite happy to see that, but I don't think it was the most thrilling race, but I think you do get that sometimes with these wet races. But again, kind of tying back into the last point, it just shows how good the Ducati was, because even with that, they were still miles clear of the rest of the field.
Yeah, it's like the sprint. When you were saying there that was the most memorable thing, I was trying to think, like, what happened in the sprint? Pecco was weak, and
The faces in Park
kind of what I
Ferme,
remember.
I guess, were like the most interesting part. Other than that, the Ducati guys is looking distraught. But
Yeah, exactly. Realizing that their own weapons have been used against them. Like, again, I was so happy when I saw, because again, you go from a perfectly dry track in Moto2 to a wet outlap and sighting laps and stuff in terms for the GP race. So I was like so excited, because I was like, to be honest, right, I don't really have a hand in the title if it goes to Pecco. Fair play to him, he's been brilliant this year. He's made too many mistakes, but if he gets it done, you can't argue he doesn't deserve it. I said last time he doesn't, because again, he frustrates me. He's so good, but still frustrates me. But if Martin wins it, he's done a brilliant job to overturn the factory team on a satellite bike. You can't underestimate how much the factory team around you can just crunch that data. We've seen so many times with Pecco that he has a struggling Saturday, comes out on Sunday. You can nearly argue it again today, but again, the conditions probably were favourable today for him. But like, I don't really care which way it goes. I just kind of want it to go to Valencia, and even if it goes to Valencia, then I'm thinking like it's kind of gets solved in qualifying, because like it's such a hard track to race at Valencia. These current bikes don't really race well there, so like it's not the ideal finishing. I'd actually much rather have Valencia next and then go to Sepang for the finishing, because I think Sepang is a good racetrack. We get a bit of weather, we could see a bit of something happen. I think that would be a good way to end the season off. Whereas I think Valencia, it could be like Pecco qualifies third, Martin's on pole, and it's like, well, like Pecco has to nearly go and crash to kind of like make up the difference and try and do something outrageous to make something happen on such an awkward track. We've seen it in the last couple of years there when the championship goes there. It's a championship decider, but like it's never on track decider with good battling. We remember the first year at Qatar, he tried to get it involved with Pecco for like a couple of corners, and that was it. There was very little happening. It's just not a good ending to the season, unfortunately. But the main race, the conditions, it definitely, in my eyes today, would have said Pecco would have been more comfortable. Martin, I feel, to be honest with you, I just feel like he
had a lot more
built up a bit of a head of. Yeah, I felt like he built up a bit of a head of steam and tried to just push through the sensations, because for the majority of the race, I felt like he was on close to crashing. I never felt that Pecco. There was a couple of slides, and I think Pecco very, very much likes having a lot of engine brake, because the bike really was fishtailing around a lot in the rain, and it does move a lot in the dry too. But I feel like there was lots of moments for Martins. He almost crashed with the Marquez on the main, and you see him, he loses in front, similar to Mark. So I think he's fortunate today to only lose a handful of points to Pecco, because there was a couple of times today where I was like, geez, he's risking a lot here. Like, and when Marquez is there, fair enough, you could say he needs to kind of keep Marquez in between them for Pecco, but Martin for me was just making a big job of today's race, and I felt up until the weather, I felt he's pretty much got this championship. He's pretty, like, the 24 bike has head and shoulders covered everything else, so like you're not going to see a Brad Binder and Pedro Costa and Marc Marquez all finish ahead of a Jorge Martin when Pecco wins. So it's going to come down to 1-2, 1-2 the whole way. So we're at the point now where Pecco's just probably made it interesting by getting it down to 17 points, but it's a bit of a difficult run in. But I suppose much more of the race, Martin for me just made the mistakes. I think Pecco's was pretty much faultless. Again, the odd slide here and there, which is very, very much forgivable in these conditions, but I think Pecco really handled the pressure from Mark. A couple of beautiful cutbacks, and I think overall really did really well today to get that win. I think it was an easy race to make a mistake. We saw Martin have a couple of very scary front end bobbles run off track a couple of times, so very easy. Could have opened or closed this championship today, but unfortunately it kind of just brought the clamp just down slightly. But I'd kind of hope that Marcus finished second, and I was kind of 10-13 points going into Sepang. I think that would just been, as a neutral, I think would have been better overall.
Yeah, Bagnaia was just really good today. I mean, it's one of those things. He didn't have anything to lose. He had to beat Martin today. If he lost to him again, it was over. So it was win or bin for him, and he did win. He managed it really, really well. Like you said, he obviously managed to fend off Marquez. I mean, to be fair, Marquez just blew the corner both times he tried to go past him. So yeah, he did get the cut back quite easily there. But like you say, he was not making any mistakes. Martin was basically the opposite. Martin led early on, of course, ran off the track at turn 3. Dropped down to 3rd place. Then the amount of corners he must have missed in about a 2 or 3 lap period, he was all over the place, wasn't he? He was really, really struggling. Then obviously when Marquez went down, he had the same moment, like the exact same one with the front end, but he managed to save it, fortunately for him. And obviously then I think at that point he decided to come home in second. But you saw after the race, he was really, really happy. He was happy to do that because, I suppose it's worth noting, after the sprint with the result there, it did mean that Martin does not have to beat Bagnaia again now. He can just finish second to him, which I guess he did exactly what he needed to do. It was a tricky race. He almost crashed a few times, got away with it. Finished second. I think he'll be more than happy with that. Bagnaia had to win. He'll be probably quite happy with that. But I think, again, overall, it's, as I've got the notes here, tit for tat, really, in the title chase. Obviously, he lost a few points to the sprint, gained some back in the main race, but it's still in Martin's hands, I think, because he can now finish second to him every race, which I'm not saying they're going to want to every race, but it's quite likely that they can do that because they have done it most of the season. And really, especially for Bagnaia, it means he has to win every race basically now. So yeah, he kind of has nothing to lose at this point. He has to just go for it. He can't afford to finish behind Martin again. And I think today he knew that, and he did. He managed it really well. We've seen him do it before. He's good wet weather rider. Martin, throughout his career, not been the best, but last season actually had some really good wet weather performances. I think Motogp kind of stands out. He managed to beat Bagnaia there, but yeah, he did what he needed to do. But like you say, he definitely made a meal of it because he was running wide, making loads of mistakes. He's lucky the others weren't as close, especially Digi Antonio, because he really had some good pace at the end and was coming through. I think if he'd been there, and I thought he also got very lucky with the Marquez crash. Now I think Marquez probably would have potentially could have won, so he could have made the points gap small, I guess, for Martin. But you don't know that because obviously Marquez ended up crashing. I think in the end he reckons he could have won. He thinks he was just too impatient. But yeah, again, it looked like he was having to make up a lot for that GP23 disadvantage and just stepped over the line today. But somebody else that was having quite a good weekend overall, Fabio Quartararo, again, just give him a bit of a shout out because he had to go through. He didn't get through straight to Q2, but he managed to go through, which I think is the first time I've seen a Yamaha do that, because usually they do their fastest laps and the first run look like they're going to go through and then get beat, but he managed to get through, then qualified 6th, so the best performance of the weekend qualifying wise. But he didn't have any luck in the race, unfortunately. In the sprint, he got pushed wide by Binder over the curb and then was right to the back. Main race, he made an amazing start. I mean, into turn 1, I was looking at, obviously, you look at the leaders, and I saw like a Yamaha going at the inside into like 3rd place. I was like, what is this? How is he there? Because you don't usually expect the Yamaha to get a good start, but I guess, and in the wet, the Yamaha tends to go quite bad, but I guess because it was fully wet race, it wasn't like it was wet dry. The Yamaha was working quite well. He was running 4th place, obviously, until unfortunately Morbidelli just completely wiped him out, which was a shame for Fabio because he was having a really, really good weekend and they deserved to be rewarded with more than they got from it. He had a quite a good sprint race actually, even with he had to come back through. Unfortunately, again, you don't see a lot of that kind of battling further back, but it does make sense to focus on the championship. But when you see like riders fighting their way through, it'd be interesting to see some of that. But yeah, really unfortunate. Very reckless from Morbidelli. I feel long that penalty definitely was the right way to go with that one. It's just the typical thing. I don't imagine anyone's going to have any complaints with that penalty because that's what we typically see. You knock somebody off, you get a long lap. But yeah, I do feel for Fabio because he was having a good weekend, but he was obviously a bit ruined twice at the same corner. But Binder's obviously wasn't as bad because he didn't actually knock him off. But Morbidelli's move was just a bit silly. I think he was definitely quicker. I think he would have got past Fabio anyway. And Morbidelli probably ruined his own race by doing that as well because he then crashed later on. I think potentially he could have had a good race because we have seen him do some pretty decent performances when the conditions are a bit tricky.
Yeah, it was unfortunate because I think Fabio. First off, his save in Q1,
Oh yeah, that was good.
unbelievable. Probably the best save I've seen all year. It was ridiculous how much it went. And it's just it's with Yamaha. It's baby steps, one and a half steps forward, and then it's a half step back. So you're thinking we're still half step forward, but then next time out it's another step back. So it's very much up down left right with their performances and the consistency. Because Rins was nowhere, unfortunately, for pretty much again the whole weekend.
He was
So
really critical as well, I think, of Yamaha after Friday. I think he was saying they just can't get him a good setup. So yeah, he was really struggling.
he seems to be very critical of ever since we've gone to the flyaways. I remember in the first day at Japan in Motegi, he was slating them essentially. Stuff we haven't seen since Vinales' time at the team, where he was just like, it just isn't good enough. Like this is a factory effort, and this is just not. And like you can't say he doesn't know because he's been in a championship winning team with Suzuki when Mir won the championship, so he knows what a good Japanese manufacturing factory team is like. So the fact he's that kind of scathing of them just shows that maybe that even though they are making progress, it's still just not um all roses at Yamaha. And it was a good weekend. Again, every weekend that just something happens with Fabio, whether he crashes or he does something good or there's been some controversy, you just think, my God, we are robbed of this guy at the front. And I know you're a huge Fabio fan, and I am too. He's just wasted back there. It's just a shame to have him back in the midfields. And then when he has good race weekends, it was disappointing to see him getting taken out because like could he top five probably was where he was at. Really, I don't think podium was under Trefman, but
I think he'd have gone
it,
backwards as the race went on anyway, because it did dry a little. I think they would have slipped back. That's what I predict, but because he didn't really like he was one of 3 or 4 riders to get back on, and he was probably the slowest then out of the ones that did that.
yeah,
So,
definitely.
although he does strike me as the type that once he's crashed, he's probably not going to go over the limit, whereas somebody else that we'll come on to in a minute certainly wasn't scared of doing that.
Uh, it's just it's a Yamaha syndrome of just we just you can't trust them. Unfortunately, their bike until I would say until we get the V4, we mightn't even see that ever raced. Um, it's just Yamaha are they're in a bit of a pit when it looks like they're getting better. You still just wonder, is it track dependent? Is it all Fabio? Until we see like next year, if we see three Yamahas go directly through to Q2 or something at like a European race, then you can start to think, right, things are on the way up. Like, but when we see them at a flyaway kind of in the Thailand in weird conditions and one guy is making a difference, you can't really say that's Yamaha improvement. And that's more just they are very lucky to have one of the top three men in the world on their equipment doing ridiculous stuff week in week out and not getting the praise for it. So as much as we don't get to see him, I try and praise as much as we can because I am aware of what he has been doing this year and probably all of last year. I don't think there's any question from anyone his ability, his commitment, or his skill. For the time being, he's not going to be able to show much with package.
Yeah, I think maybe there has been a couple of points. I think probably some points through last year as well where perhaps he does let his eye off the ball. I think there was a few. There's a run of sort of weekends where Morbidelli was suddenly a lot closer to him, and then you get to a round like India, for example, where the bike was suddenly working quite well. He was all of a sudden miles ahead again. So I think when he was stuck back there, it did seem potentially like it was worse. I actually think this season's been better. I think in terms of points, it's worse, but I feel like he's had more weekends where he's been close. Like Le Mans, he was running top 10, like top 6 kind of positions. He's obviously doing that again today. Misano, he was both Mizanos, he was battling with the KTMs. So I feel like it's because of how good the Ducati's been this year, it makes the points tally worse, because I feel like if it was more like last year, and there was only a few of them up there, I think he perhaps would have had the top 5 at some point in the season, maybe a podium in the right race. Obviously, got the sprint podium briefly in Jerez, of course, but that was obviously a very bizarre one. But so I actually feel like his season has been better. But like I say, it's hard to tell if it's him or the bike that's improving because Rins is nowhere. But I guess we won't find out till we get some extra bikes on the grid. Rins back to sort of full fitness, I suppose. Also, probably worth noting that Zarco also got through to Q2. Again, kind of unfortunately for Honda, it seems like they can do that. They like over one lap, they are definitely closer But I think probably just because it is a V4, to be honest, so it can actually get out the corner a bit better, and you can push the front on the Honda. You can force it to fit for a lap. We have seen Sarko get through to Q2 a few times, but unfortunately when it comes to the races, they just seem to go backwards, and after seeing him into Q2, didn't see him for the rest of the weekend, so it's unfortunate, but also I think it's worth a little shout out for Zarco there. It's nice to shout out the Japanese manufacturers to see how they're getting on, because there is some good rides going under the radar there. But someone that used to be on a Japanese manufacturer and was having a bit of fun with them today, Marc Marquez. Obviously, we already kind of spoke about what happened to him earlier on. He was trying to go with Bagnaia, crashed in turn 8, I think it was. Almost saved it. Front end went. He was saving it for ages. I think I saw somewhere where he said if he had about like 2 or 3 more meters and no curb, he would have saved it. But unfortunately for him, that's not how it works. He probably would have managed to save it by the looks of it, but then he hit the curb, and yeah, at that point the bike then went further over, and down he went, remounted. To be fair, I was surprised how close he was to the leader. Still, he was like 20 something seconds behind it. It took him a while to get it started, so yeah, I was actually surprised to see he was that close still. But he did what we've seen him do. In fact, actually, the second time I'm going to reference the Jerez sprint race in a very short period of time, which is a bit strange. But similar to that, he kind of forced his way back through into Jean Mir, unfortunately, on the receiving end again, bashes him out the way, picks up a drop position penalty. Apparently, he briefly overtook Nakagami and then let him back through to serve that penalty, although it wasn't seen by the stewards till he said afterwards. Then he, I don't see what else he really did after that one, but it was apparently actually his leathers came undone as well, apparently. So again, Alpinestars leathers coming undone. So not good to see at all. So a bit of an eventful race. Back to what we've seen, the unfortunate side of Marc Marquez sometimes, where once he crashes, he loses his rag a little bit, starts riding a bit over the limit, passes Mir out of the way, gets a penalty. Don't know what other kind of passes he did, but probably some harsh ones. I did see him go off the track at one point as well. So yeah, not the cleanest race for Marc Marquez.
Yeah, I feel like in the media he tries to portray that he's much more calmer and more wiser, Mark, but like he's still the guy that was half to blame for him and the Rossi feud. We'll say, I don't want to get into too deep, but it takes two to tango, and it still shows that like once the helmet goes on, he's an animal, and respect wouldn't be a word I'd say he has on track for many people. I think when he's battling against the GP24s, I don't think it's out of respect. I think it's out of, he understands that his equipment is a lot lesser, so he has to be maybe more strategic and planning and cunning. Whereas when he's up against someone that's like a Maverick Vinales or someone that he knows like bike wise that he has an advantage, he just does not show them an inch of respect on track, which still is a bit an issue. I think I don't think that's a good way to go. Like I think
definitely not.
Like we've seen it multiple times this year alone. So it's not a good look for him, because he gets a lot of flack even from basically his part in the Rossi rivalry. To this date, he still gets a lot of slack, and I think anytime things go bad for him and he seems to see red, I think it's only going to keep people that have an opinion on him keeping the same way, because people will still think that he is the Marcus of old, which to be honest I think he is. I don't think he has changed as much as he probably in the media. I think he's similar, and he plays his cards very smartly, probably something that he picked up off of someone else maybe in the past, but he's very smart in what he says. He doesn't seem to. He always tries to deflect pressure and put it on other people and say, "Well, I'll be happy just to be top 3 in the world and all this." Whereas, like, you see him race on track then, and when Stem goes on, he's just it's night and day difference between the guy he actually is. So, maybe we could see more issues in the line. I could see fallouts between him and other riders. I really do. I just think that the way he's on track and stuff. Expecting some fallouts next year with one Italian in particular. I'm not going to mention who he is, obviously, but yeah, I think it's a shame, because he's not in a championship hunt. He's ruined, like he just absolutely rode into Mir. Like it's just like Mir gets sent so far to the track.
He tried to blame Mir for that as well, by the way.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah. it's not a good look for someone who is, what's he now, 31, 32. He's getting on a bit,
Yeah.
like, so he should be on the wiser end of it, and he should be more understanding that, like, he can't keep getting away with this, and like there's going to come a point, I don't think it's happening yet, where he will start slowing down and he'll start needing to probably something that maybe Valentino didn't handle too well. So maybe one, he couldn't blast people in the way he used to throughout his career. That he kind of needs to stop making as many enemies. I think it's going to happen with Mark as well if he keeps going the way he is, because he will put a chip on everyone's shoulder the way he rides like that. And like I can understand the frustration of crashing, but like have to show respect to everyone on the racetrack. And like even like I don't even like the way he done the penalty where he's overtaken someone then briefly giving the position back. Like that's, I think the drop position penalty has to be, like, the penalty comes in if you overtake someone and you've gone off track, or if you've made contact, or if you've done basically an unfair overtake. I think you should give the position back to the guy behind you. I think if you go forward a position, you have to give two positions back. I don't think, because like I made the point before the podcast, if you think of turn 2 at Chang, it's a massive hairpin. You could lunge from a mile back, go straight for the apex, run a touch wide, and briefly you've gone from we'll say 11 to P10. Oh, I've overtaken him. Oh, then I ran wide to give him the position back. Like you're not getting penalised for running someone completely off the track and then trying to blame them for it. So it's the unfortunate side that we still have with Mark. I think, to be honest, it's part of him. He's always going to be like this. I don't think he's ever going to change. I think that's just is Mark. But it's unfortunate because I think it's going to cause him more and more issues, because he's not making any friends on the racetrack when he's doing that to people. And like he seemingly seems to get on quite well with Mir, but like I can't see him after doing it twice this year. And there was instance last year as well where he didn't show much respect when there's other instances. So yeah, I'm not too sure of the reasoning. I can understand he gets frustrated, but he just really seems to see red when things don't go his way at the moment. Out throughout his career, really.
He does. He just reverts to that. It's like obviously Termas back in the day. Really, that's always the standard, one, isn't it? That whole race was a Marquez seeing red show, and yeah, it was. Sometimes it provides some fantastic races for us. I mean, like up until the crash was a Jerez 2020. That was all of the red mist when he made the mistake, and all the passes were aggressive but clean in that. But yeah, I think sometimes it's when he's I think it's probably when he's running out of laps or whatever, and he needs to make the places back up. I suppose he's still fighting for third in the championship. I think that probably plays into it to an extent as well. So yeah, and maybe that's why, because obviously he knew Bastianini. Well, he might not have known Bastianini had already crashed, but he obviously wanted to pick up some points. But even still, obviously you can't do that to people. And yeah, rightfully got a penalty. Like you say, it's a little bit weird that you can get away with sort of serving it in that way, but that's just the way it is. Maybe the rule needs changing, but you know, if you can do that, obviously, yeah, of course he's going to do it. I don't blame him for doing it, but yeah, it's a little bit.
I feel like he's cheated out of a mistake, because he was 3.5 seconds ahead of Mir when he was given that penalty, and he lost nothing for that. He basically didn't serve any penalty, because from my eyes, he's lunged at Nakagami, probably going to touch wide, because we haven't seen it, but like, if he's punted Mir off the track that far, then blamed him, you can be very fair sure Nakagami, he's probably been absolutely blasted, and then just maybe just left the bike up and then let him back through, and then absolutely blast him again into the next corner. So it's just not great. We don't need to be seeing this from someone who's that talented, but he still seems to have the inner demon.
Yeah, definitely. That's the unfortunate side of Marc Marquez. But that pretty much does bring us to the end of this episode of the MotoGP Extra podcast. So if you are listening on Spotify, if you could rate the podcast 5 stars if you enjoyed it, that really would help us out. Or, of course, if you are listening on YouTube, do like the video as well, because that just helps more people find the podcast and more people to be able to enjoy it. So next round then, the last of the flyaways, the last of the triple headers, the Malaysian Grand Prix. So we'll see you next week to discuss the events of that and potentially crown a new MotoGP World Champion.